All right, guys, we're going to try to use this table to just give us a nice little visual for a drawing of the brachial plexus. What we want to remember is that the brachial plexus is numbered from 5, 6, 7, 8, 1. Okay, and remember we're talking about the roots of the brachial plexus. We're then going to see that the C5, 6, 7, 8, and 1 roots go independently. Where the transition is going to happen is where the root of C5 and C6 meet. C7 will continue by itself, and then we're going to see C8 and T1 join together. Now that's where we get to our upper, okay, our upper, our middle, and our lower trunks. Okay. The next portion of this is going to go from the roots to the trunks to now the divisions. And remember, the divisions are pretty straightforward for the posterior division. We're going to see from the upper, the middle, and the lower trunks, they're all going to converge to give us the posterior division. We said the anterior division was a little more complicated because they don't join together. So we end up with 1, 2, and 3 parts of the anterior division, but again, they don't line up perfectly with each other, or rather they don't meet each other. At this point, we get to our chords. So we had our roots, our trunks, our divisions, and now we get our chords. Now, keep in mind the chords are named based on their position to the axillary artery. So this one portion that we see here, it continues posterior, and it is the posterior chord. We then get a continuation as the lateral chord and a continuation as the medial chord. Now, at this point, the lateral and the medial chord are going to join together. So our lateral and our medial chord are going to join together, and they're going to create the median nerve. The lateral chord is going to continue, and it's going to give us our musculocutaneous nerve. Our medial chord is going to continue, and it's going to give us our ulnar nerve. Now, these 3 nerves of the brachial plexus are going to stay to the anterior compartment of the arm, at least up to the brachium. Now, keep in mind our posterior chord is going to continue, and then it's going to go continuing posterior to your humerus, and it's going to split, giving us here our axillary nerve through the quadrangular space, and then our radial nerve as it travels through the triangular interval in the back of the arm. Now, let's complete the picture. At C5, we're going to see our dorsal scapular nerve come off, going to rhomboid major, minor, and our levator scap. And we said the pathology associated with a flared scapula. We said from C5, C6, and C7, we would get our long thoracic nerve traveling with the lateral thoracic artery to the serratus anterior. And we said the pathology associated with it was a winged scapula. We said from the upper trunk of the brachial plexus, we would get our suprascapular nerve going to supraspinatus and infraspinatus. We also said we would get our nerve to subclavius, which just goes to our subclavius muscle. We said as we get to the lateral and medial chord, we would get our lateral pectoral nerve and our medial pectoral nerve, and we said that they're connected via the ansa pectoralis. Now, we also said from the posterior chord of the brachial plexus, we would have 3 branches: an upper, a middle, and a lower subscapular nerve. We took note that sometimes the middle subscapular nerve is immediately called the thoracodorsal. Now, the thoracodorsal nerve again is going to the latissimus dorsi. Upper and middle, upper is only subscapularis, the lower is going to subscapularis anteres major. Remember, our medial pectoral nerve here is going to go through pec minor and go to pec major, but our lateral pectoral nerve is only going to innervate our pectoralis major. Okay, now these terminal branches of the brachial plexus are going to continue through muscles and then ultimately go to the skin. And we'll take note of that as we get to those portions. Now, there's one more part I do want to take note of. Off the medial chord of the brachial plexus, where we got the medial pectoral nerve, you will also get a medial brachial cutaneous nerve, which is short. It'll stop maybe by about mid-bicep. And then we get a really long medial antebrachial cutaneous nerve. It's going to go all the way down to the forearm. okay? So again, those are the different components of the brachial plexus. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove our picture because we don't need it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put our cadaver back in place. And we're going to look at the brachial plexus on the actual cadaver, building it from just the skeleton. So we're going to get rid of everything, but we are going to leave the skeleton. I'm going to come down here to the nervous system, and then I'm just going to add brachial plexus. I'm going to add the whole thing, okay? Now, when we see it, we may get a little overwhelmed, but just remember, we just got to take this piece by piece, right? If we remember here, we're going to see the C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1 nerve roots. So if we were to touch those areas, it's going to highlight it as just the C5, C6, C7, C8, and then our T1 nerve roots. Now you'll notice that C5 and C6 then join together, C7 continues independently, and C8 and T1 also join together. Now that's our landmark to tell us that we have the upper trunk. We have our upper trunk. Your upper trunk will also sometimes be written as superior. Middle typically is always middle. And the lower trunk is sometimes referred to as the inferior trunk. Now for clarity, we're going to go ahead and remove the clavicle just so we can see some things. As we remove the clavicle, we're going to note that there is a little bitty nerve coming off the upper trunk. And a minute ago, we just said that that was the nerve to subclavius. Okay? We also may remember that off the back of C5, we got our dorsal scapular nerve, which we can see here. We should also remember that from the roots of C5, C6, and C7, we got our long thoracic nerve, which we can follow right there. Now, as we move from the roots to the trunks, we now get to our divisions. Now, the easiest way to identify the divisions is going to be to look for three parts coming together. If I can find those three parts together, even though this is overlapping each other, I can tell the difference. Now, what we first touched was the anterior division. I'm going to go ahead and highlight it, and then I'm going to touch the posterior division that's deep to this. See if we can get it without having to move things. You might have to move it posterior to get it. There it is, right there, posterior division. I'll highlight it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just for clarity going to remove the anterior division just for a second. So let's get rid of our anterior division. And now what we can see really easily is that 1, 2, 3. So each part of the superior, middle, and inferior trunk came together, giving us our posterior division. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to put back that anterior division just over the top. So remember, there's 3 contributing to portions to the anterior division. There's 3 contributing to the posterior division. Now, as we continue to move down, we're going to see these continue as the lateral. They're lateral. Let's use a different color. Our posterior, remember it'll be posterior to the axillary artery, that's how it gets its name. And then our medial cords, okay? And the medial cords. Now we sort of have a lot of action happening in this one area, okay? Taking a pause back, we're just going to remind ourselves that we do see our suprascapular artery coming from the upper trunk of the brachial plexus, just like we saw the nerve to subclavius. It's just a little bit lower. You can see it coming off just a little lower, but you can trace it to the suprascapular notch, so it's pretty easy to locate. Now, on your lateral cord, you may remember we get our lateral pectoral nerve. On the medial cord, you should remember that we get our medial pectoral nerve. And then we should remember that there's a little loop that connects these two guys together, which is known as the ansa pectoralis. Okay. Now, if we continue here with the posterior cord, right here, the posterior cord, I've got it in purple as it continues to the terminal branch, but it also has this other branch that comes off, okay? Let's see if we can get to it. Right there. continuation of the posterior cord is going to be our axillary nerve. The continuation of the posterior cord here going towards the spiral groove of the humerus is going to be your radial nerve. Remember, the radial nerve innervates everything on the back of our arm, even all the way down to the forearm, and most of the back of the hand as well. Now remember, the posterior cord stays posterior to your humerus. So if you see these two big nerves going behind the humerus, you know it's either axillary or it's radial. The other nerves, they're all going to stay anterior. So what we'll see is we're going to see the continuation of this nerve here. Okay, that's our musculocutaneous nerve. Remember, it goes through coracobrachialis and then goes to biceps and brachialis. We're going to see the union of our lateral and medial cords, and that's going to give us our median nerve. We're then going to see the continuation of the medial portion of the brachial plexus, the medial cord, and that's going to continue as the ulnar nerve. A good, easy way to find that is to look posterior to your medial epicondyle and see the nerve that sort of disappears there. The nerve that disappears posterior to the medial epicondyle is passing into the ulnar groove, and so that has to be the ulnar nerve. Now, off that medial cord of the brachial plexus, there's two other nerves that are important, and we just saw them a minute ago in the first video. And I'm going to add the muscles back in so we can see them. Okay. So remember, cutaneous nerves are going to be superficial, and so the first thing that we're going to see right through here, okay, is our medial antebrachial cutaneous nerve. Now we got to be careful because a portion of it stops here, but the rest of it continues all the way down into the forearm. We're also going to see that there's another nerve that's going to stop around the same area, okay, and it's there highlighted in yellow already for us. Now that's the medial brachial cutaneous nerve. Now there's one more nerve that we have to know here that emerges from the axillary region, which is our intercostal brachial nerve, but it literally is really just kind of right there in the armpit itself. Okay, you can just see it there highlighted in green. Now the brachial plexus has more to it. Remember, the terminal branches of the brachial plexus tend to become cutaneous nerves, and as we move into the forearm, we're going to see those and the other branches, but that's a good start.